Раз, два, три. Эй. Один, два. Раз, два, три. Один, два, раз, два, три, четыре, пять. Низкий сигнал. В смысле, что? Высокий? Высокий. Раз, два, три. Эй. Все равно большой. А вот так. Один, два. Эй. Раз, два, три. Большой. Один, два. Один, два. Раз, два, три. Эй, один, два. Раз, два, три, четыре. О, раз, два, три. Эй, раз, два, три, четыре, пять.
What is the European Jewish Association? It's the fastest growing Jewish advocacy organization in Europe, with a growing number of communities across the continent. We empower Jews.
The European Jewish Association fills an essential role, working in conjunction with European institutions, the Parliament and regional and national parliament.
Hello, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience. I would ask you, if at all possible, to perhaps move a bit further forward, because there are some people that will be joining us later. So if you can move up towards the front, that would be absolutely wonderful. And we're going to get started at 2:15 on the dot. Thank you so much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just before we get started, I would a friendly reminder. We are in the midst of a pandemic. Please keep your masks on during the meeting so we don't create what was called a super spreader. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we kick things off properly, I would ask our chairman, Rabbi Menachem Margolin, to join us up on stage, along with the President of the Parliament of Ukraine, His Excellency Mr. Ruslan Stefanchuk, and finally Mr. Marek Siviec, the Director of European Affairs at the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. Thank you. Just waiting for the videos.
What is the European Jewish Association? It's the fastest growing Jewish advocacy organization in Europe with a growing number of communities across the continent. We empower Jews.
The European Jewish Association fills an essential role, working in conjunction with European institutions, the Parliament and regional national parliaments, combating anti-Semitism in all its forms, empowering Jewish communities, and strengthening Jewish life all across the continent.
We represent at the highest levels of politics and diplomacy.
Europe without Jews would not be Europe.
We must ensure that Jews feel at home in Europe and are there proud of being European citizens. We do know that Europe can only prosper when its Jewish communities can prosper too.
With the European Commission, we have launched a campaign to debunk online hate speech and conspiracy theories, particularly anti-Semitic statements.
We put Jewish issues front and center of the debate. We ensure that the Jewish voice is heard and represented in the corridors of power and in the media. We fight anti-Semitism. We provide support for every Jew that needs it. We work with governments to safeguard our institutions and places of learning. We propose practical and workable solutions. We believe that education can always conquer hate. We instill Jewish pride in our youth, giving them a voice and bringing forward the next generation of Jewish leaders. We exist to make Europe a better place for Jews and ensure a Jewish future. This is the European Jewish Association, and we thank you for being part of our ongoing story.
Kiev, a prolific center for Jewish education, culture, and political activity, abundant with important Jewish institutions and more than 230,000 Jewish citizens on the eve of the war. With the complete occupation of the city by the German forces, the Jewish population of Kiev was soon forced to gather in the Babin Yar ravines on the outskirts of the city. Headed by foot to Babin Yar, the Jewish residents of Kiev were soon forced to undress completely and dispose of their material possessions. Naked and afraid, they were beaten inhumanely and led by force into the ravine, forced to lie down on top of the corpses of other Jewish families who had already been shot. In the evening, the Germans buried their corpses under the thick layers of earth, while history buried the story of the once prolific Jewish population of Kiev. This is the untold story of Babin Yar, where an approximate number of 33,771 Jewish men, women, and children were cruelly and systematically shot dead by Nazi machine guns and handguns on the 29th and 30th of September 1941, transforming the Babin Yar massacre into one of the single largest instances of mass murder carried out during the Holocaust. In the following years of German occupation, Babin Yar itself became a mass grave for the brutal extermination of Jews, POWs, Romani, Ukrainians, and others, reaching estimated numbers of around 100,000 lives. 4 decades after the war was over, the Soviet authorities had systematically erased the memory of the Babin Yar massacre. To mask history, Babin Yar was turned by the Soviets into a waste site. Today, in the independent state of Ukraine, and with the support of the President, the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center uncovers the facts, details, testimonials, and photo documentations, bringing to light an untold story of inhumanity and cruelness. A story that shall live in the memory of the millions that have died, so it shall never be forgotten, so it shall never be repeated.
Excellencies, distinguished parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen of the media, my name is Alex Benjamin. I'm the director of the European Jewish Association, and on behalf of our organization, I want to express our deep appreciation to you for being with us on this delegation to Babin Yar in cooperation with our partners, the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center and the Federation of Jewish Communities of Ukraine. For the symposium, there will be occasional moments where translation is required. Most of you by now should have headsets that you can use, and you will find the relevant channels located on the booths at the back of this meeting room. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you, as a courtesy to your fellow delegates, your fellow guests, please, at all times, keep your mask on. Ladies and gentlemen, many of you will be hearing about Babin Yar for the first time. The atrocity that happened just a few kilometers away from here was covered up, both physically and metaphorically. We are here to uncover it, to give it the full attention it deserves ahead of International Holocaust Memorial Day. It's not easy for many of you to take away from your important roles, to travel to the eastern edge of Europe, much less during a pandemic, and certainly in the mouth of a worrying escalation. Once again, we appreciate it very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you just saw 2 short videos. We gave you a short introduction of the work of the EGA and a brief look at what the work and the reasons behind the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center are. To elaborate further, it is my pleasure to invite the chairman of the European Jewish Association, Rabbi Menachem Margolin, to formally open this symposium. Rabbi Margolin, please.
Dear ministers, members of parliament, diplomats, our partners in organizing this conference, the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center and the Federation of Jewish Communities in Ukraine, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I would like, first of all, to thank you very much for being here with us today, for making the efforts to join us in this very important event. We invited you here to remember, to respect, to declare loud and clear, not on my watch. The world has known many tragedies, but none can compare to the terror of the Holocaust. The destruction was so cruel, so total. 6 million Jewish lives and millions of others were lost. There are many who ask, why it is not enough to learn a bit about the Holocaust in history lessons in schools. Why is there a need for memorial events, for memorial sites, for museums? But those of you who came here today know very well the answer. What is so tragic about the Holocaust? It is not just the fact that it was a cold, efficient, orderly, and planned program to systematically murder millions of people, men, women, children, and babies. What makes it even more tragic is the fact that within a space of a few years, a single person, one single person, managed to exploit such hate that it caused millions of intelligent and logical people to become animals and to abuse and kill so many innocent people in such horrific ways. And that, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be left for history lessons. Because it is not history. It is as relevant today as it was back then. Because this hate, unfortunately, not only still exists, but continues to grow year on year. There are still people today who hate Jews not less than Hitler hated us back then. Today, the 24th of January in 1939, the Reich's Central Authority for Migration of Jews was established in Germany, the function of which was to cause emigration of all Jews from Germany. And today, 24th of January 2022, I am unfortunately forced to declare that without even the need to establish an authority to immigration for the immigration of the Jews, there are countries in Europe that either because of the rising of anti-Semitism, either because of laws against kosher slaughter and circumcision, which make Jewish life impossible, will certainly not have Jewish community in their country within a decade. How quickly can International Holocaust Remembrance Day become just another day? Too quickly. And we must not allow it to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, we've invited you to attend this conference because we are now at a major crossroad. There is now a very fragile and delicate balance between the desire of quite a few important European leaders who do have the wish to have future life in Europe and the level of anti-Semitism in Europe that will affect, certainly, the identity and the interest of the future leaders of Europe. And we feel like we are holding our finger in a dam, and we need your help. In the last few weeks, European media was dealing a lot with the story of Anna Frank. A lot of accusation. Who gave the information about Anna Frank? These articles is terrible. But what makes it so terrible about these articles is because this is part of a very planned propaganda that aim to claim that the Jews carry responsibility for the anti-Semitism. Because even if this research is truth, and the information about Anna Frank was given by a Jew, what should we discuss is who created the situation that made people to do such horrific things, to give information about another person. Elie Wiesel, one of the most famous Holocaust survivors and Nobel Prize winner, gave an interview once. And he was asked, what is the most embarrassing moment in your life? He was thinking a bit, and then he said that he remembered one day when he was in Auschwitz. When he came back, he was brought back from the labor to the camp. after a long day of work. They were very tired, very hungry, and he got a small piece of bread. His father, who was there with him, also got this small piece of bread. And Elie Wiesel said, I remember how much I wanted my father to die because I wanted to take his piece of bread. And I feel so embarrassed. How come that I wanted my father to die for a piece of bread? Terrible situation. But could you blame Elie Wiesel for that? You cannot blame Elie Wiesel for having the wish for his father will die. Exactly like the way we cannot blame the person that might, if it was truth, gave the information about Anna Frank. Dear friends, the situation is absolutely not easy for us. And therefore, we need your help. In the next 2 days, we will share, we will listen to ideas, knowledge, and mainly tools that could help us to fight better anti-Semitism. I would like to thank each one of you for making the efforts to come here today. I would like to thank you very much for your commitment, not only to remember, not only to respect, but to act. To act to increase education against anti-Semitism in your respective countries, and to ensure that no Jewish community in Europe will be harmed. Thank you very much.
Rabbi Margolin, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the honor now falls upon me to introduce a very, very distinguished guest who, despite the enormous pressures of his office and the current crisis at Ukraine's borders, took the time to be with us today. I think it's a testimony to his commitment to this issue and to the Jewish communities here as well, that he's chosen to be with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very, very warm welcome to the President of the Parliament of Ukraine, His Excellency, Mr. Ruslan Stefanchuk. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Шановні учасники форуму, шановні пані та панове. Як ви знаєте, згідно з резолюцією 60/7 «Пам'ять про Голокост», яка прийнята Генеральною асамблеєю Організації Об'єднаних Націй у 2025 році, 27 січня у світі відзначається Міжнародний день пам'яті жертв Голокосту. Український парламент також прийняв низку важливих актів для вшанування цієї річниці і цієї дати. Як ви знаєте, Україна на державному рівні вшановує жертв трагедії з 2012 року. І відповідно до постанови Верховної Ради України про 70-річчя трагедії Бабиного Яру від 2011 року, і окремо ми прийняли закон України про запобігання та протидію антисемітизму в Україні, яким антисемітизм, його прояви в Україні забороняється. І цей законопроект був прийнятий нещодавно, підписаний президентом України, і сьогодні вже є діючою частиною нашого українського законодавства. З часу трагедії Голокосту минуло понад 80 років. Але людство і досі живе з геном страху. Це трагедія загальнолюдського значення. Трагедія, яка для багатьох поколінь є синонімом страждань і людського болю, символом зневаги до людини, її життя і фундаментальних прав. Єдиною запорукою порятунку від повторення та попередження таких жахів є пам'ять. І українці відчувають себе солідарними з мільйонами людей доброї волі у всьому світі, об'єднаних рішучістю убезпечити людство від руйнівних наслідків людиноненависництва, расизму та ксенофобії. Окремо я хотів би, щоб ми з вами зрозуміли один урок. Що все це, що відбулося 80 років тому, стало можливим тільки тому, що люди мовчали. І їхнє мовчання неважливо, чим було зумовлене. Чи страхом, чи егоїзмом, чи байдужістю. Але цей урок ми повинні засвоїти добре. І дуже прикро, що він стає актуальним і сьогодні, в сучасній картині світу, в сучасній Україні і за її кордонами. І тому Україна відчуває це як ніколи гостро. І ми засуджуємо будь-які прояви геноциду. Для українського суспільства вивчення і усвідомлення Голокосту, а також належне вшанування пам'яті його жертв має особливе значення. Так само, як особливе значення для нас мають вивчення, усвідомлення рівня руйнувань, завданих українському народу Голодомором, який організував сталінський тоталітарний режим, та вшанування пам'яті його жертв. Голодомор 32-33 років в Україні було визнано геноцидом українського народу відповідним законом. Комеморативні заходи, що проводяться в Україні на знак увічнення непоправних втрат Голокосту, свідчать про відданість нашої держави утвердженню у власному домі міжнаціонального миру, міжконфесійного діалогу та цінностей взаємної поваги і терпимості. 27 січня ми також згадуємо і українців, які, ризикуючи власним життям, рятували євреїв від нацистського терору. Ми пишаємось тим, що понад 2,5 тисячі українців отримали почесні звання праведників народів світу від меморіального комплексу катастрофи та героїзму єврейського народу Яд Вашем в Ізраїлі. На алеї праведників світу в Єрусалимі на честь українців висаджено чимало дерев. Україна посідає 4-те місце серед держав світу після Польщі, Нідерландів та Франції за кількістю праведників народу світу. Цю світлу пам'ять не спаплюжать ні дезінформація, ні облудні звинувачення, що лунають з боку російського агресора, який нині взяв на озброєння найцинічніші методи пропаганди для виправдання власних загарбницьких дій. Я хочу, щоб ми всі зрозуміли, що український народ – це громадяни України всіх національностей, єдині у своєму прагненні, говорячи словами Конституції, до зміцнення громадянської злагоди на землі України. Ми також підтверджуємо європейську ідентичність українського народу і незворотність європейського та євроатлантичного курсів України. Тому, шановні учасники форуму, дозвольте мені з нагоди Міжнародного дня пам'яті закликати вшанувати пам'ять жертв Голокосту та підтвердити нашу віру в гідність та рівноправ'я всіх членів людської родини. Вічна пам'ять невинно убієнним жертвам Голокосту. Україна пам'ятає. Дякую.
Excellency, thank you. And we wish you fortitude, courage, and our best wishes in these trying times for you. Thank you for your words. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Marek Siwiec, a great friend of the European Jewish Association and European Jews in general. He also happens to be the Director of European Affairs for the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. Marek, if you'd like to join us, thank you so much.
Good afternoon. In the forthcoming hours, you will have a lot of opportunity to speak and learn about the iconic place for Holocaust. I can say the second most tragic, iconic place with Auschwitz-Birkenau. Babin Yar is such a place. You will learn about the numbers, you will learn about the technology of crime, you will learn about the people who were killed, because we identified majority of these people, but also you will learn about the 150 killers. We have also, our foundation, identified these people. You can know who was killing these people. You should know that Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, it is 5 years old foundation, which was established as Ukrainian project to bring this memory for the Europe. This happened 5 years ago, and I can say proudly that based on the Ukrainian law has been created the unique foundation which is focusing private money and public support of Ukrainian government, Ukrainian president, Ukrainian authorities. So having the Speaker of Verkhovna Rada here, I would like to thank for that and to say that cooperation with the Ukrainian authority is the milestone of the success of this project, because everybody should know this is in Kiev, this is Ukrainian. But speaking about that, we should know that this is international project. As the memory about the Holocaust is international, should be international, that's our responsibility. So being here, representing so many European countries, representing members of the European Union, members of the European, huge European community, please remember that we are coming here to enjoy Ukrainian effort to bring this memory to us, but also to underline our responsibility for that. If I say European project, it means that we are speaking about 1.5 million citizens of Europe being killed by Hitler and being forgotten by the Stalin. It goes together. It was unique. This is unbelievable. And Europe, in next years after Second World War, also forget about these people. In the British Empire War Museum, having huge exposition about the Holocaust, 2 floors. You can find 2 small posters about Nazi aggression to Soviet Union and to 1 small poster about the Babyn Yar crime. This must be changed. This must be changed. We know every name of the persons killed in Auschwitz every day. We don't know where were killed 1.5 million people on the occupied territory of Soviet Union. And that's the job of our foundation. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for all of you. As my friend Rabbi Margarine said, it is not easy to come, and this is a certain demonstration from your side. We appreciate very much your presence here. I must tell you that this event, being in the eve of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, is several weeks after it is anniversary of Babyn Yar crime. We had a lot of guests here. Tomorrow you will visit. First time you see how this place was changed, how Babyn Yar became a place of commemoration, how you can find the names of the victims. You can listen the prayer getting in. You will feel comfortable in your pain, in your memory, and in your thorough. Thank you very much, and have a good time here. Welcome to Kiev.
Thank you, Mr. Siviec. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a short video of welcome from a great friend of the European Jewish Association and a powerful advocate for European Jews everywhere, EU Commissioner for Neighbourhood and Enlargement, Mr. Oliver Varhelyi, who sadly couldn't be with us today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and privilege to contribute on behalf of the European Commission, at least virtually, to the important mission of the delegation of the European Jewish Association. We are here today to honor the memories of victims of Babyn Yar massacre. It is undoubtedly one of the worst tragedies of our history, and we join Ukraine in its solemn commemoration. Horrible crimes took place at Babyn Yar more than 80 years ago. The Nazi occupation killed almost the entire Jewish community of Kiev. Entire families of several generations have been erased. Indeed, it remains hard to speak about and impossible to make sense of an event of such horror, cruelty, and magnitude. We are here today to ensure its full history is told. There were times when they tried to conceal this black page, to ignore it. It was suppressed for decades by the Soviet regime. And the time came when they finally started talking about Babin Yar, but did nothing. The remembrance of the massacre will unfortunately not help the dead, but will help the living, those who need to know about it, remember it, pass it on to children and grandchildren. Widespread ignorance and indifference in our society allows anti-Semitism to flourish and even grow if left unaddressed. It is key to assume responsibility in continuously informing and educating the young and the old. This is especially true as we are losing the last Holocaust generation. We are here today as we must never relax in our efforts to prevent such inhumanity from happening again. We have to fight hatred to violence and incitement so that people do not forget what anti-Semitism can lead to. The Holocaust is an indelible stain on European history. And anti-Semitic prejudices, again, are unfortunately widespread in Europe and the world. Jewish communities are at risk and experience anti-Semitic attacks and incidents. We must promise that Babin Yar will never happen again. Above all, we are here today to commit to redouble our efforts to counter the kind of hatred that had led to the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism represents a threat not only to Jewish communities and to Jewish life, but to our whole society. We are all in this together. When we fight anti-Semitism, it is not only a matter of justice for fellow Jewish citizens. It is simply incompatible with Europe's core values. It is up to all of us to fight it, to prevent it, and to eradicate it. Rest assured, you can count on the firm and unequivocal commitment of the European Commission. Any form of anti-Semitism, incitement to hatred, or violence is unacceptable and is against humanity. These principles are non-negotiable for the European Commission. We are committed to foster and protect Jewish life and tradition, not only in the EU, but also beyond our borders. This is the main message of the first ever EU strategy that was adopted just 3 months ago. I believe it is a real game changer. In my portfolio in the Western Balkans, Eastern Europe, Middle East, and North Africa, you can count on my personal dedication and firm commitment to deliver on these principles. We're working hard to translate this political commitment to real actions on the ground, to make an impact and deliver real results. In this regard, I have a plea for you today. I would like to develop new EU-funded projects with the prime objective of protecting and fostering Jewish life together with you, to foster better understanding of Jewish life and tradition, to organize intercultural and interreligious dialogue, to protect Jewish cemeteries and synagogues, and last but not least, to promote Holocaust remembrance in schools and universities. Your contribution would be key for the success of this initiative. I would greatly appreciate your ideas and concrete proposals. My office is always open to you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a thoughtful conference.
I think we can all agree, powerful words, and wonderful to see a commitment from the Commissioner. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we thank His Excellency, the President of the Parliament of Ukraine, for being here. If we could all give him a round of applause once again, because he needs to attend to his duties. So thank you very much, and I would ask both the President of Parliament, Rabbi Margolin, and Mr. Siviec to exit the stage for now. Thank you so much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's one thing to talk about the Holocaust, and we're going to be doing that a lot over the next couple of days. But it's quite another to hear directly from those that actually witnessed it. Those who carry this burden of pain with them their whole lives, excuse me, and who represent the very reasoning behind our Not On My Watch campaign. It is therefore my honor to invite Mr. Boris Zabarko, the chairman of the Association of Jews of Former Prisoners of Ghetto and Nazi Camps, to speak with you now. Thank you, Mr. Zabarko. Please. Mr. Zabarko, you'll have to come around this side. I beg your pardon. And then as soon as Mr. Zabarko arrives and gives his brief remarks, we'll be going straight to our panel. Thank you, Mr. Zabarko. Thank you.
Дорогие друзья, для меня великая честь вместе с вами участвовать в симпозиуме, который посвящен Международному дню памяти жертв Холокоста. Это наш день. Это день тех, которые выжили. Это день тех, которые помогали выжить. И это день практически всего еврейского народа. И если учесть резолюцию Организации Объединенных Наций, это день всемирный. Я бывший узник Шаргородского гетто. Сейчас я председатель Всеукраинской ассоциации евреев, бывших узников гетто и нацистских концлагерей. Я пришел с книгами. У меня большой доклад, но я его читать не буду. Я хочу посвятить несколько слов тем, о которых меньше говорят и меньше известно. Я хочу говорить о выживших в Холокосте. Большое количество конференций, симпозиумов, большое количество самых разнообразнейших событий вспоминают жертв, вспоминают преступников, вспоминают праведников народов мира. В последнее время уже стали говорить о коллаборантах, а о выживших практически очень мало известно. Их голос тихий, и он где-то на обочине. На выживших смотрят, как на людей, которые, старые, это естественно, которые все время что-то просят и прочее. Но выжившие – это другие. Это те, которые в страшном аду, в страшных притеснениях, издевательств, в страшных условиях боролись за жизнь и выжили, и не дали Гитлеру осуществить окончательное решение еврейского вопроса. Потом они включились в нормальную жизнь, и многие из них внесли большой вклад в развитие цивилизации. 3 человека из выживших лауреата Нобелевской премии. Много депутатов в разных странах, много в Конгрессе были, много 2 человека министра иностранных дел. Извините, я возьму. Среди великих писателей выжившие, среди великих ученых выжившие, среди великих интеллектуалов выжившие и так далее, и так далее. Но все это в западных странах. Там, где после войны не было такого антисемитизма, какой пережили мы, выжившие в Советском Союзе и в нашей нынешней Украине. Поэтому среди нас, к сожалению, нет ни нобелевских, хотя нобелевский лауреат Хоффман выжил в Золотеве у нас в Львовской области. Украинская семья спасла его, и он потом эмигрировал в Америку и стал известнейшим ученым по физике и химии и так далее. Пауль Целан, который родился в Черновцах, стал выдающимся немецким поэтом. И так далее, я могу назвать многих. Пару слов о себе. Когда началась война, через месяц к нам пришли немцы, а потом прошли через нас итальянцы, венгры, и остались румыны. Начался страшный ад в гетто, но благодаря украинским нашим друзьям, семье Самборских, мы выжили. Отец погиб на фронте, дядя сгорел в танке, освобождая Будапешт. Я закончил школу, университет, потом докторантура, потом диссертация и так далее, и так далее. И у меня были книги, были научные достижения разные, но мы не занимались Холокостом. Холокост до 90-х годов у нас в Советском Союзе и в Украине – это табу. И только в годы перестройки, и только тогда, когда развалился Советский Союз, было первое собрание людей, которые выжили в Холокосте, людей, которые претерпели нацистские ущемления в концлагерях, в лагерях рабочих, остарбайтеры. И была создана впервые в Советском Союзе такая организация. А потом, когда развалился Советский Союз, в 1991 году в наших странах были созданы еврейские организации, выживших в Холокосте. Наша организация, одна из них, тогда у нас было в 90-х годах свыше 8 тысяч, сегодня где-то порядка 2-2,5 тысячи. Так получилось, что после войны никто из выживших не были объединены. У нас не было еврейской единой организации. И только после 1989 года, после этого большого митинга, собрания и прочее, в 1991 году мы создали такую организацию. И я не буду рассказывать о всей деятельности нашей, но хочу сказать, что сегодня основная цель выживших, и особенно последнего поколения, выживших, это собрать воспоминания о том, что с нами было, и передать опыт нашего выживания нашим детям, нашим внукам и следующему поколению. И все сделать для того, чтобы сохранить память, потому что без памяти нет будущего. В 1993 году к нам в Киев, в нашу организацию, из Израиля приехала группа выживших из Польши, которые в Израиле создали музей Бейт-Лахамей Хагидаот. И мы создали группу, мы получили диктофоны и стали ездить по городам и селам Украины и собирали воспоминания. Эти воспоминания ушли в Америку, ушли в Ельский университет, ушли в Вашингтонский мемориальный музей Холокоста. И на следующий год приехала большая киногруппа, и мы опять объездили всю Украину, собирали эти воспоминания, потому что практически на Западе много говорилось о Германии, о Чехословакии, о Венгрии, особенно много о Польше, но о Советском Союзе, об Украине практически никто ничего не знал. И тогда мне удалось по собранным воспоминаниям опубликовать в 1999 году большой сборник первых воспоминаний людей, которые выжили в Холокосте. Он назывался «Живыми остались только мы». И эта книга ушла в Германию, и к нам приехали коллеги из Германии, из Кёльна, Маргарет и Вернер Мюллеры, и попросили разрешения перевести эту книжку на немецкий язык. Почему я говорю о книгах, почему я говорю о книгах на иностранных языках? Совсем недавно во многих странах мира прошел опрос. Тревожные получили результаты. В Европе 34% европейцев не имеют никакого понятия, что такое Холокост. Во всем мире больше, чем половина населения никогда не слыхали о Холокосте и прочем. Есть опросы в Канаде, в Америке, в Австрии, в Англии, во многих других странах. Это действительно удручающе. К нам я опубликовал 8 больших книг на русском и украинском языках. К нам приезжают из разных стран люди. Я им показываю, они говорят: Боря, это все хорошо, но мы по-русски не читаем. И вот поэтому мы издали такую большую книжку, которая называется «Nur wir haben überlebt». Только мы выжили. Она прошла, мы 4 поездки были в Германии, посетили 22 города Германии и Швейцарии, проводили презентацию и громаднейший интерес. Почему? Потому что и в Германии, и в других западных странах абсолютно не знают о том, как это было у нас на территории Украины, как это было у нас на территории бывшего Советского Союза. И к нам в Киев приехало 200 немцев из Тюбингена, родители которых были в вермахте немецкой армии и на Восточном фронте, и они участвовали в расстрелах евреев. Они пришли, и был большой митинг у нас в Бабьем Яру. И выступила женщина, которая сказала: я никогда раньше не интересовалась проблемами Второй мировой войны, вообще историей. и прошла книжку эту «Nur wir haben überlebt». Поискала среди писем, которые в свое время дедушка писал домой. И встала на колени, стала плакать, стала извиняться. Ее дедушка участвовал в расстреле евреев у нас в Бабьем Яру. Потом нас пригласили в Тюбинген, мы там провели большую презентацию, и интерес к этой немецкой книге был очень велик. Была международная конференция, на ней был представитель Англии, Бен Хелдгот, сэр Бен Хелдгот, тот, который с сестрой чудом уцелел в польском гетто. После войны их отправили в Англию, там он добился больших успехов, стал работником Climbs Conference, и на международной конференции он подошел ко мне, после моего выступления, когда я показывал свою первую книжку на русском языке, попросил эту книгу. На следующее утро он подошел, глаза красные, он говорит: я сам пережил Холокост, но то, что я прочел, это меня ввергло в шок. Потому что то, что действительно у нас на Украине такой страшный, такой жестокий, такой невыносимый Холокост был, его не сравнить ни с бельгийским, ни французским, ни нидерландским, ни каким другим. И он говорит: у нас в Англии и в Америке практически никто об этом не знает. Я хочу перевести твою книжку и издать. И вот эта книжка вышла на английском языке. Время шло, и, как это ни странно, несмотря на то, что и Организация Объединенных Наций, и разные другие международные организации, и ЮНЕСКО, и Европейский Союз, Союз Европы и так далее, громаднейшее количество резолюций, постановлений и прочее, но очень мало об этом знают. И тогда те немецкие мои коллеги попросили, чтобы они издали на немецком языке вот этот громаднейший том «Жизнь и смерть в эпоху Холокоста». В отличие от первых книг, эта книжка собрана практически воспоминаний со всей Украины. И в отличие от первых книг, она представлена хронологически, практически по мере того, как немцы захватывали и расстреливали, убивали, уничтожали наших евреев, идет этот рассказ. И научные комментарии о каждом месте, о каждом селе, о каждом событии. Эту книгу мы должны были провести презентацию в Германии, но началась эпидемия, и профессор Бенц провел презентацию без нас. И, наконец, английская книга. То, что больше всего приходит к нам, требует, просят. И в ответ на это мне удалось собрать большое количество воспоминаний и перевести из всех моих русско-украинских книг и издать вот этот двухтомник на английском языке и с большим научным комментарием с библиографией, с глоссаром и так далее, и так далее. Научный аппарат представлен. Эти две книжки для англоязычного читателя. Почему я рассказываю об этом? Это не афиша, это то, что делают люди, которые выжили в Холокосте, не ходят с протянутой рукой, а большую работу делают по сохранению памяти. И вот этот результат сохранения памяти. Мы собрали очень большое количество уникальнейших воспоминаний, те, которые рассказывают о таких событиях, ни в какой энциклопедии, ни в каком научном труде вы не прочтете. Мы сделали силами выживших документальный фильм «Млын» по книгам нашего человека, члена нашей организации, еврейского писателя Бориса Наумовича Хандроса. На деньги, конечно, не наши, это немецкие деньги. А во всех этих изданиях, во всей нашей работе, к сожалению, государство не принимает участие. Все, что мы сделали, это за счет спонсоров, за счет зарубежных спонсоров. И мы высоко ценим эту помощь, и мы благодарны им. Сейчас нас осталось все меньше и меньше. И музей, который сейчас создается, музей, который мы поддерживаем, потому что из опыта я участвовал в 3 закладах камней в 2001 году, в 2006 году, в 2011 году. В одном разе был президент страны Кучма, во всех остальных правительства, особенно много людей из Израиля, политические деятели, министры, Либерман и другие, большое количество раввинов всех стран. Все говорили, мы откроем, мы сделаем и прочее. Я все время выступал и все время просил, пока мы живы, сделайте. До настоящего времени, за 30 лет, те музеи, которые мы создали силами выживших в Могилеве-Подольском, в Кировограде бывшем, Кропивницком, в Одессе, в Харькове, в некоторых других местах. Это сделано руками тех людей, которые выжили, которые стараются сохранить память о своих семьях, о своих местечках, о тех местах, где они были расстреляны, наконец, о еврейских именах. Сохранить эти еврейские имена, потому что за 70 лет советской власти и 30 лет новой власти мы не даем нашим детям, нашим внукам старые еврейские имена. Здесь, в этих воспоминаниях, они приведены. И мы сохраняем память не только о месте, где это было, но и о фамилиях, о семьях, о судьбах этих семей. Для нас это очень и очень важно. Это тот голос, который должен был звучать теми людьми, которых расстреляли. Мы этот сегодня их голос. И мы очень благодарны тем зарубежным организациям, которые помогают нам. И мы очень рады, что этот новый будущий музей решил эти книжки перевести на другие языки с таким расчетом, чтобы мир наконец-то узнал о страшных событиях которые были на территории нашей страны. Во время этих событий 1,5 миллиона еврейских сынов и дочерей только нашей страны были уничтожены, были спалены, были расстреляны. И память о них надо сохранить. Сегодня, когда поднимается страшная волна антисемитизма, ксенофобии, сегодня, когда мир переживает кризис и эпидемия, и все это, конечно, влияет на всех нас, сохранить память о Холокосте – это значит выступать против антисемитизма. Сохранить память о Холокосте – это значит сделать все, чтобы это не повторилось. И наша цель, и я думаю, цель сегодняшнего симпозиума также посвящена этому сохранению памяти во имя будущего. И мы бы очень просили бы, чтобы все вместе мы участвовали в том движении, которое бы привело к тому, чтобы наши дети, наши внуки не пережили то, что мы. Нас осталось мало, мы последнее поколение. Все то, что мы не сделали, придется делать вам. И я поэтому желаю вам успеха. Спасибо. Да.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm now going to invite, for our panel discussion, our moderator, Mr. Bojan Panczewski, who's the Wall Street Journal Germany correspondent. Along with Bojan, I'd like to invite up as well Deputy Marshal of the Senate of the Republic of Poland, Senator Michał Kamiński, and last but by no means least, MP Zdravka Vucic, the Special Envoy of the Speaker of the House of the Croatian Parliament. There we go, Madam. Thank you so much. We'll also be joined as well for this panel via Zoom by His Excellency Minister Gatis Egletis, who's the former chair of the Latvia-Israel Parliamentary Cooperation Group. I'm now going to hand over to the professional, wonderful Mr. Bojan Panczewski. Bojan, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Welcome, everyone. That was a compelling, powerful testimony we just heard, and we heard some very powerful statements from politicians and activists earlier, which set the tone for the debate that we are going to have in a series of panels, and trying to flash out some of the main points that were made at the beginning of this symposium. Mr. Zabarka informed us of a shocking statistic that 30% of Europeans are unaware of the Holocaust. This panel is a warning, is about the Holocaust being a warning from history and imposing a duty to teach us lessons. And obviously that's a huge challenge if 30% of people are not even aware of it. Rabbi Magolin said that the Holocaust is not history, it's present, but he also said that the never again mantra of Europe is becoming a sort of a ritual. It's a sort of a commemoration, annual commemoration that perhaps as the generation of Mr. Zabarka is leaving the stage has become more distant to younger generations, and especially to younger generation of political and other leaders in society. So we have here a panel of notable politicians joining us from Latvia via Zoom will be His Excellency the Minister Gatis Eglitis. He's a former chair of the Latvia-Israel Parliamentary Cooperation Group. Next to me sitting is the Deputy Marshal of Senate of the Republic of Poland, Mr. Michal Kaminski. And next to him is a legislator from the Croatian Parliament, Ms. Zdravka Bušić, who is envoy of the Speaker of the Parliament and a chair of committee. So perhaps I should start with Mr. Eglitis, who is joining via Zoom. I would like to know, what is the Latvian approach to Holocaust education? Latvia has a specific situation. The Latvian statehood was intertwined with Second World War, and there was a collaboration between Latvians and the Nazis, and this collaboration is commemorated every year. So does that stand in the way of teaching the Holocaust, and how does society deal with that?
Yes, well, thank you. I hope you can hear me well. Okay. So first of all, it's a real shame I could not be with you. Unfortunately, COVID changed my plans. But today I participate as a representative of the Latvian government, and I hope to be also joining next delegations that will be commemorating the Holocaust. And to answer your question, I would say about Holocaust education in Latvia, school curriculum includes Holocaust as a mandatory topic now for more than 10 years and is shared between history and civic education subjects. It is included in teaching about questions such as, about questions about genocide, where it's explored as a model of genocide. And also about identity and individuals' responsibility, where issues of collaboration with the Nazis and rescue of the Jews are discussed in classrooms, as well as topic of bystanders and their motivations. And pupils, children are encouraged to research the Holocaust as also part of their local history. The life and the fate of Jews in their locality, in their Latvian regions, wherever they live. And also sort of interviewing elderly members of their communities, so sharing their memories and so on. And but we're also seeing that the Holocaust topic is becoming increasingly visible also in sort of cultural products, so to say, books, movies, theater, performances that are now more accessible to the younger generation, and also many teachers opt to discuss Holocaust using these media. And I must say that in Latvia we have more than 200 school teachers that have participated in special seminars organized by Yad Vashem and Memorial de la Shoah in Paris, and so that is in collaboration with our Ministry of Education, and many seminars organized also by our local institutions like Jews in Latvia Museum and Association of History and Civic Education teachers. So, and also International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance guidelines on teaching about the Holocaust are available in Latvian and widely used. And as to the second part of your question, indeed, well, the Nazis entered Latvia on June 23rd, 1941, and on the same day, the Einsatzgruppen started killings, and all of Latvia was occupied by 8th of July, and some 15 to 16,000 Jews managed to flee, but more than 90% of the Latvian pre-war Jewish population perished during the brutal killings. And attempts by the Germans to provoke anti-Jewish pogroms largely failed when they entered Latvia. So what they did, the special collaborator units were organized to basically to conduct the killings, and this was of course accompanied also by massive anti-Semitic propaganda in the media and so on. So it is estimated that totally between 3,000 and 4,000 locals were involved in the Holocaust, either through concentrating, convoying, or actually killing the people. And in some locations it was German or the Wehrmacht would do the killings, and in some places it was the local police units, where like these special Latvian police units were formed, and the most notorious is this Arais or Arais Commando unit. And but to answer your question, I mean, we need to be honest with our nation's past, and this is what we are doing also. I as a member of the Latvian government, we are being honest about our past, and then we are doing what we can as regards today, like education curricula, to make sure that the Holocaust is not that it's not forgotten, and then it's that the younger generation especially they know, and we are seeing good results in that respect. So thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Perhaps we can move on to Mr. Kaminski. Poland at this very moment is in a very peculiar position, and I think you've spoken publicly about this. There is an ongoing dispute, quite intense dispute between the government of Poland and the government of Israel over the nature of the Polish involvement in the Shoah, and also about the restitution rules and the new law that was proposed by the new government. It has come to even these two countries withdrawing, at least temporarily, their ambassadors. Could you update us on this and tell us how you see the commemoration of the Holocaust in that context?
Thank you very much. First of all, for the invitation. Second, for the question, which is quite important, but I would like to start with the word shalom, because I think that especially in these days, in this part of the world, the word shalom is widely needed. And I think that today's discussion, I will shortly come to the point you mentioned, I mean the Poland particular situation, but in today's discussion we should underline the importance of education and the importance of the lessons of history, because today sometimes we said it should be never repeated, and that's why we should remember it. So I think that there is the reason why we should so loudly tell the people today about Babin Yar, about the Holocaust, that unfortunately in today's world some people are repeating the old mistakes. And what makes Holocaust unique in this regard is, I think that everyone here in this room knows that the anti-Semitic rhetoric was present in the Western world long before Holocaust, but unfortunately is present also after the Holocaust, which means that there is a failure in education, because if you are just a human being, doesn't matter of which origin, if you learn the truth about Holocaust, we will not be able not even repeat, but just you will not be able to listen to anti-Semitic statements. And in today's world, unfortunately, we still see a lot of people who are not only ready to speak, but also ready to listen which is also a participation sometimes in a serious crime. And that's why the discussions in Poland are so hot, because they are actually, in your question, you mix two separate issues. One is the restitution law, which was, I voted against, but which was adopted by the both chambers of the Polish House, which, frankly speaking, is directed mostly against the Polish citizens of Polish origin, not the Polish citizens of Jewish origin. But anyway, it is a scandalous decision, which I was voting against, because it is not taking into account the crimes which were committed both against the Polish citizens of Polish, Jewish, Ukrainian, German origins 8 years ago. So, but this particular issue, it was actually combined with the Polish-Jewish debates sometimes by accident. But the issue about the previous law you mentioned, the law about the, let's translate it as a national memory or national commemoration, which again I voted against, it was really scandalous. And by the way, in the Polish relations with Jewish nation and with our Ukrainian neighbors as well, because this law concerned also some delicate issues of historical importance between Poles and Ukrainians. Today, all the Polish officials, you can ask, despite, I mean, it doesn't matter from the government or from the opposition, they are today united in their statements against anti-Semitism. And that's true. The other truth is, unfortunately, that the part of the government coalition in Poland is flirting with very nationalistic movements, and they are giving them their support, and in exchange they are playing very dangerously with the some emotions which are, in my view, unacceptable. But I was very proud that for the first 28, 27 years of the Polish independence, they were questions that seemed to be absolutely above the political discussion, above the political conflict. One of which was our commitment against the anti-Semitism and also our staunch support for the State of Israel. And I think that despite all the differences in the recent years, we will be able, I mean we in Poland, we will be able to fight for keeping this consensus again together. That despite our political differences in Poland, we should be united against anti-Semitism and also supporting the State of Israel, because, you know, in my years, in 11 years in the European Parliament, I met for so many times this modern model of anti-Semitism, which is directed not against Jews as such from the beginning, but against the Jewish state. And again, we are returning to the Holocaust lessons, because again, knowing the truth about today's Israel, about the tragedy of Holocaust, you will never be able to use such a provocative and unfair statements like comparing what is going on in Israel, what was going on during the Second World War. Sometimes it is an obvious lie directed against the Jewish people, but sometimes it's just the question of stupidity of the people who are telling it, because then they don't know the truth. Because in the very respective countries in the Western and Central and Eastern Europe, some people think that we don't have to teach the youngsters about the evil of anti-Semitism, about the truth, about what happened in Europe with our Jewish European citizens, with the European citizens of Jewish origin during the Second World War. So I think that education is crucial, and the true. Sometimes true is very painful for some respective European nations. Sometimes this true could be very painful, because some European nations are...
Do you mean Poland? When
as
you say
well,
this?
Poland, but not only. But please be fair, not only Poland. Not only Poland. Poles are actually quite ready and quite used to. Some of the Polish politicians, like me, for example, we are used to telling the truth about it. And sometimes you see also in the Western countries that they are not so ready to discuss their participation in Holocaust, which was also a fact in the Western Europe. But I'm, again, just want to finish my phrase. We're selling, despite, I mean, Eastern, Western countries in Europe, sometimes they are having the difficulties to face the truth about their role in the history, about their attitude towards Jews. It obviously it also touched Poland, and I have no doubt about it. But I think that the education is a way how we can, staying in the truth, make the future better.
Thank you. Madam Bušić, you come from Croatia, a country that has recently seen war. Here in Ukraine, that prospect of war is not as alien as it is in Western Europe. So my question to you is twofold. Is it difficult to commemorate the Holocaust or to introduce it to a public discourse when the nation has its own tragedies which are so recent? And the second part would be, similarly like Latvia, Croatia, the state of Croatia during the Second World War was linked to Nazi Germany as well. Is that also a problem, perhaps, or how does that affect the discourse about the Holocaust?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the questions. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for having this symposium, and I would like to greet you all on behalf of the Croatian Parliament. I have also with me my colleague, also another parliamentarian from Croatia, and on behalf of our Speaker of our Parliament. To answer your questions, I don't know how much time we have, but I could go on and on, because before the Parliament, I was also in European Parliament, a member of European Parliament, and later on I was 5 years actually state secretary. And in this position, I really attended many commemoration of Holocaust. Washington, Budapest, Poland, Warsaw, I was there as well, and Zagreb also. And your question is really very well put. Since we had the war, and I lived through the war, unfortunately, I think we have more sensitivity to that. And of course now, when we hear the news about Ukraine and what may happen, I think Croatian people, and I personally am very much afraid that something may happen. I hope nothing is going to happen, because war is the most terrible thing in the world. And I hope, therefore, as soon as I hear something like that, I alert myself immediately to that. But as far as remembrance of Holocaust is concerned, I think Croatia does quite well. And we are very much aware how important that is, how important is this does not repeat, and education is the key. Speaking about education, we have actually a program. For example, our Minister of Education, Minister Fuchs, he actually introduced, which I think it's great, And we all do this with the programs with the Jewish organizations, and we, of course, involve, and a member of our Jewish community in Croatia is involved in that. We send teachers to Yad Vashem. Actually now, because of Corona, this is stopped. Approximately 20 to 25 teachers, we send them for a week or so to get educated in Yad Vashem, and so they can teach this in schools. Also, we make field trips to actually commemorate, to sites where they commemorate Holocaust victims. And I think it's very, very important. Yeah, I listened to my colleague from Poland. I think it's the most terrible thing is not to educate people, not to educate the pupils, the students. Because if one is ignorant, it's easy to say so many things which, because education holds the key that we remember Holocaust the way it was. Now listening to the victim of Holocaust, listening to this gentleman, really, I mean, it made such a great impact on me. And if we have like people like this, of course, unfortunately, many are already gone. Thank God to some of that are still alive. They should come to schools, and in Croatia they do, and they tell their testimonies. The testimonies are the best way to educate people. We also participate in IHRA, the International Jewish Remembrance Day. We are members since 2005. Next year, 2023, we are having a chairmanship of International Remembrance, and through that we are already preparing all kinds of programs which will be held in Croatia. So I think we also made movies on Croatia's righteous among the nations, and we attended also in schools and also in cinemas, in theaters. We attended the movies. We learned a lot, and through learning, actually, students and pupils get interested, and therefore you carry on the responsibility, actually, to the need, and actually to remember and to keep in mind what happened. So I think, again, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to educate and to have this in your curricula.
Thank you, Madam. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up there because we are running way too late. This was an illustrious panel. Thank you very much for your participation, and I think we can segue. A round of applause. So I welcome you to leave the stage, and we can segue quite seamlessly into the next panel, which is actually about Holocaust and education. So I would like to invite the three panelists that will join us now. Marek Rutka, he's the chair of the Parliamentary Group for Commemoration of the Crimes in Babyn Jar in Poland. Christian Wakeford, he's the co-chair of the Parliamentary Group on British Jews in the British Parliament. And Cornelis van der Staaij, he is the party leader of SKG in the House of Representatives of the Netherlands. Please join me on the stage. I think the previous panel set the stage quite well for the discussion we're going to have. And I think some of the issues raised are very relevant for the theme, is making Holocaust education mandatory the way forward. We've seen that in the coronavirus pandemic, anti-Semitism has exploded back into the public debate, ranging from protesters, for example, in Germany, wearing yellow Stars of David on their shoulders to kind of signify that they are being treated because of having to take the vaccine or having to be tested or having to obey some rules in restaurants, that they are being treated like the Jews were treated by the Nazis. Ranging from that to basically rampant conspiracy theories on social networks that there is a Jewish involvement behind the origin of the pandemic. I would take the example of Germany, where I'm based, where Holocaust education is mandatory in schools, and in fact it's quite customary for elementary school children to go and visit places like Auschwitz, Oswiecim in Poland, one of the most notorious death camps, and that has been happening for a long period of time. However, there's a new generation also, a new generation of Germans who were not born in Germany or who were born to parents who came from outside of Germany, who don't feel that the Holocaust is part of their legacy, part of their identity. And I think that has been a challenge for some schools and teachers that I've spoken to. So I'd like to ask the panelists about the experiences they have in their countries. So, Mr. Rutka, obviously Poland is the site of the most infamous death camp, Oswiecim, better known as Auschwitz. Is that part of the curriculum, and how do you deal with teaching the Holocaust in Poland on the back of these controversies that Mr. Kamiński told us about, and also of course, among many national tragedies, Poland has Katyn, so is it easy for you to introduce the teaching of Babin Yar, which happened in a neighboring country?
Thank you for this question. We all know that acts of aggression, hatred have no limits, no matter if we are talking about Babin Yar, Katyn, of course, Auschwitz, that camp, on other places in the world. We must fight against every form of hatred. That is why in my speech on education without teaching people about history, it will be much more difficult for us to stop the rising waves of anti-Semitism and hatred. When we think about the future, we cannot forget about the history. We live in very extraordinary time. In Polish Sejm, I, among others, the member of the Health Committee. The last 2 years have been a fight against a pandemic. For several months, unfortunately, we have to devote more and more time to anti-vaccine movements. Has been accusing us of introduction sanitarism, calling the another Auschwitz. You do not even know how much it hurts me that a group of people that simply lack knowledge or education use a history that is so difficult for us in such an irresponsible way. It is caused by the lack of adequate education about Holocaust. Everyone gathered here knows someone who lost friends, loved ones in the Holocaust. I am a founder of and chairman, of course, of parliamentary group for the commemoration of the crimes of the Holocaust in Babin Yar in Polish Sejm. To emphasize, I would like to mention that is the only such parliamentary group which works to improve on Polish-Jewish relations. Education has been our priority since the beginning of our group's operations. We managed to organize a debate in the Polish Parliament to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the crimes in Babin Yar with the participation with among others Mr. Ruslan Kawasiuk, and the former President, Republic of Poland, Aleksander Kwaśniewski. We think about the future, but we cannot forget about history. Therefore, our group also tries to take part in as many events as possible commemoration Polish Jews and Polish Jews in Poland. For example, we were the only members of parliament to the celebration Jedwabne. The government side only sent its low-ranking representatives. Therefore, all initiatives to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust should be promoted by the public services, starting with the primary school and ending with the government institution. With Holocaust education in mind, we should keep as many notes, information and data as possible from the living Holocaust survivors. Unfortunately, no one lives forever, but the memory of them might be lost. That is why the idea of the creating in the Babi Yar Holocaust Memorial Center so glorious and necessary. However, remembering the past, we must boldly look to the future, therefore the education of children and young people. The idea of tolerance and openness joint fight against anti-Semitism and racism is so important. Recently, I spoke to the Marian Turski, one of the few surviving prisoners of the Auschwitz concentration camp. He asked me why. At meeting with him, people kept asking about Auschwitz and talked so little about the future. It makes me sad, he said. Finally, I would like to point out that we must look at education across generations, from the youngest to the oldest. Unfortunately, we still met people who deny the existence of the Holocaust through their lack of knowledge. Only education can change that. It is education that leads. No human development, no social media, no internet celebrates, but education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rutka. Mr. Wakeford, could you update us on what the British government is doing in terms of Holocaust education, and also perhaps whether you think, or what's the prevalent feeling in your party, the Labour Party, about whether a definition should be mandatory as to what is anti-Semitism to be taught in universities? I think the Labour Party has had an issue with equating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I think it rejects it. And I guess also there have been a string of sort of controversies around the former leader, and perhaps in particular Mr. Jeremy Corbyn, who was accused by detractors of supporting a form of anti-Semitism from the left. So if you could comment on these two issues, one closer to home perhaps than the other.
Thank you. In terms of what the government is doing, I think the Education Secretary sent a strong message when one of his first visits was to Auschwitz, to show that from a personal level he was taking Holocaust education extremely seriously. However, we do need to be doing much, much more. Holocaust education needs to be much more than one lesson a year or as part of the history curriculum, as it was when I was at school, where you literally learnt about the Night of the Long Knives and Kristallnacht, and that was about it. So I think in terms of where we were and where we are, we've come a long way. There's still a long, long way to go. In my own constituency, I consider myself extremely fortunate. You know, we have a large Jewish care home called the Fed, who've done an amazing project called My Voice, which is making sure that the voice and experience of Holocaust survivors who are resident there is being documented, and it's fair for everyone to be able to read and learn about, because lived experience is important. But unfortunately, the survivors are dwindling in numbers now. But these survivors are going out into schools, they are teaching firsthand their own experience and what that actually means. And that is so important. We then have fantastic ambassadors, whether it's Nomi Lopian from the Holocaust Education Trust, the same for Karen Pollock, who are making sure that continuous lobbying is being made towards the government to make sure that there's much more done. But we also need to remember it's not just a school's place, it's not just the government's place to make sure that the Holocaust is being educated to young people, because as soon as you leave school, you're going home. It's very well learning a lot of tolerance when you're in school, but if you're learning the fears of division when you go home, I think we need to find a way as to how we can be doing much more with parents as well. So I think there's a lot more that we can be doing. I mean, in an ideal world, we would have everyone go to Yad Vashem and walk through a children's memorial, and I would challenge anyone not to leave without a tear in their eye. And if we can find any way to go down that route, I would certainly applaud them. In terms of the IRA definition becoming mandatory, from where we were just over a year ago when I was raising it in Parliament, when I think you had more Premiership football clubs who'd adopted the IRA definition than you had universities, we've now got to the point where I think it was 121 education institutions that have now adopted IRA. So that's a huge change from where we were. However, it needs to be much more than a badge to say, aren't we brilliant? We've adopted the IRA definition, look at us, we're a shining example and we're a safe space. We only need to look to Bristol University, to Warwick University to see that actually adoption hasn't really changed anything. It's not been factored in into any disciplinary matters. So I think adoption is a good step, but actually it's pointless until we actually have true enforcement of the IRA definition. So that will hopefully start being rolled out even further through the Office for Students. But we do need to make sure that notorious academics, the likes of Professor Miller, cannot spout their conspiracy theories about anti-Zionism, how everyone is linked to the Israel lobby, myself included. And it does take bravery of Jewish students, of the JSOC, of parliamentarians who will stand up and say, actually, this is crank conspiracy theories. There's no place for it in modern society, and enough is enough. In regards to the last question, it's certainly a topical one, considering I went from the government party to the Labour Party less than a week ago. In short, I'm not going to shy away from the problems that were there even just over 2 years ago. I think there has been a stark contrast with a new leader whose first promise was to root out anti-Semitism within the party. Before I crossed the floor, I had a very in-depth conversation with the new leader, Keir Starmer, and he outlined where he wants the party to go to ultimately be a safe space for Jewish members of society who feel that they can put their trust back within the party. I think there is still a lot of anger and hesitation and an issue of trust out there in regards to whether or not it's quite there yet. I think most people will recognise that there has been a sea change, and even the Jewish Labour movement in their recent survey went from 4% feeling the Labour Party was a safe space for British Jews up to 78%. So that is a very marked change. So I think it's part of a journey. I think it's still very early days, but I think Keir has certainly got the commitment. We've shared a platform when we were celebrating Hanukkah in the House of Lords, and if I didn't believe Keir, I wouldn't be here. So I think there is a very strong commitment. I think we can keep on talking about former leaders and what that means, and I think at some point you do need to draw a line in the sand. I mean, from my own experience of just the last week, it's seen as a personal betrayal from part of the community who voted for me, and that's a challenge that I need to overcome. Because since I've been elected, I've tried to go out my way to do everything I can do for the Jewish community, because from my experience, they've been the most marginalised within British society for the last 5 years. So for me, it was, my first international visit was to Israel. I started learning Hebrew very badly, so I think my only phrase I still remember is "Ani lo melvin ifrit," which still doesn't go very far. But I think there is continuing conversation. People are feeling safe to go towards the party now. But in regards to the equating of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, I think there's one very clear message, and that's anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. One doesn't lead to the other. They're both the same. It's just a different word to describe the same fear. So whilst people may be wanting to be critical of a policy decision by Israel, I'm a proud friend of Israel. Sometimes that might mean being a critical friend, but I don't think you can be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic. And thankfully the new leader sees that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Wickford. You raised a very important point, I think, that education about the Holocaust in schools could be futile if children go back home and they are confronted with anti-Semitism with the parents, which is something I'd like to ask you, Mr. van der Staaij. I think there have been reports that in the Netherlands there is a large migrant community which originates in countries which have acrimonious relationship perhaps with Israel, and it's a type of anti-Semitism perhaps that is structural in these countries because it's linked to the state of Israel. And then when people obviously move on elsewhere, like in the Netherlands, they're perhaps not responsive to the message that we're discussing today, or to kind of processing the narrative in education about the Holocaust. So I would like to ask you, is this a challenge in educating young people, educating society about the Holocaust in your country? And a second part of the question, if I may, we talked about universities with the earlier speaker. I think Dutch universities at least have had controversies about anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, perhaps coming from the left, perhaps also linked to the state of Israel. And if you could speak a bit about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is sometimes a challenge to teach about Holocaust on the schools, which you give the example of some migrant groups that are very negative towards Israel and also supporting anti-Semitism. And so it can be difficult for a teacher to frankly speak about it. And so I think it's important, we see that in our country, that a formal rule that you have to teach about Holocaust is not enough. You have to encourage the teachers, and you have also to support them to do that on the good way. And I think what was already said this afternoon, that it's very important that it's not only a subject of giving some information, but also I will underline the personal testimonies, the storytelling. I think that's very vital in Holocaust education. Storytelling. When I look to my own history on schools, it makes sense. It was very impressive to hear the personal stories about what some people, men, women, what happened in the past. And I'm here with the Chief Rabbi Jacobs from the Netherlands also, and his stories about what happened in his family, but also not only in the history, also in our times. The broken windows, that was very impressive. And also in our parliament, it encouraged us as parliamentarians to make again and again a specific issue of anti-Semitism. So I think the storytelling, the continued attention, the constant attention to it, that's what's very important. And indeed, you are saying on the universities, sometimes you see there is a debate about the policy of Israel, but it is sometimes real anti-Semitism what's coming forward in the discussion, and we have to be very keen on it and not to accept it when it leads to anti-Semitism. And we have in our country now a coordinator combating anti-Semitism, and I think it's very interesting and important that such persons are monitoring and looking on what's real going on also on the universities on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think this was a very interesting discussion. I very much value. I thank you for your interventions. We are running out of time, unfortunately, and I've been informed that we will not be having a coffee break. Bad news for everyone. I hope we can maintain the attention curve even without the caffeine. So I thank the panel, invite you to leave the stage, and I invite the organizer, Alex, to say a few words now before the next panel.
Thank you, Bojan. Thank you, panel. And I can assure you that, that the next panel will keep you nice and perky. I would like to introduce you to my dear and esteemed colleague, Mr. Tal Rabina, who's our Director of Strategy at the European Jewish Association, who's going to be having a conversation with YouTube's Director of Public Policy, who's going to be joining us via Zoom. Of course, social media is an aggregator of hate these days. Some of the worst forms of anti-Semitism are appearing online. And in fact, the anti-Semites generate more likes, more controversy, more following, and in fact, they're being rewarded by many of these companies. So in order to have a discussion about that and the impact that it's having on young people, Tal Rabina is going to take it from here. Tal, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you all for being here. And as you said, and as we just heard in the last panel, education is undoubtedly a key tool in the fight against anti-Semitism. However, in this era, when every keyboard owner becomes an effective editor of hatred, incitement, and fake news, education should no longer be seen only as a formal education system, but also the ecosystem of the social media at all. To address this issue, as Alex said, we are going live to Brussels. I hope we can have right now on the screen. Okay, so until we'll go to Brussels, may I invite three brilliant young people from the EGA Jewish student, Miss Yvonne Penkavova from the Czech Republic, Miss Carla Haliwa from Belgium, and EGA's Youth Development Officer, Eitan Bergman. We'll start with these three brilliant young students, and then we'll try to connect to Brussels, to YouTube headquarters. Guys, the floor is yours.
Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ethan Gabriel Bergman, the Youth Development Officer at the EGA. I'm a former student in the Netherlands, and I am joined by other students and leaders to my left, namely Carla Haliwa and Yvonne Pekavova from Belgium and the Czech Republic, respectively. Now, besides being proud of our long-lasting culture and identity, we have also witnessed a growing tumor, which spreads like cancer through our society and at times institutions. The oldest hate, which adapts itself like a chameleon to societies and times, being Jew hatred or anti-Semitism. Not due to aspects of religion or culture, but because our difference as a wandering people was dangerous, and due to blatant ignorance. It may take the shape of supposed social justice, ignorant associations with ideologies such as communism or capitalism, or absurd conspiracy theories, even the deliberate shaming and erasing aspects of our identity in order to be accepted in society. However, how do these elements manifest in younger societies? How do we handle such issues as young Jews in Europe? And what are our challenges? But before all this, a bit of context and a couple of observations are to be made. Firstly, in terms of the image of Jews. Now, when I meet people that learn of my identity, they tell me they wouldn't have guessed I'm Jewish, or that I'm the first Jew they ever met. A lot of people have a stereotypical image of Jews, whether it be physical, ideological, etc. So I want to ask the other people here, why do you think that is? And does it also take a political assumption as well? Carla?
Well, thank you, Ethan. Hello, everyone. So I kind of have the same experience as you regarding my friends not knowing any Jew. I was actually mostly one of the first Jews they ever met, which was a huge responsibility, not only because, you know, I had to show them what I think Judaism is and being a Jew in Europe is, but also because, you know, there are some stereotypes that you have to fight against. And I was actually very impressed and happy with the reactions that I got because, you know, we're afraid of what we don't know, but when we learn more, it becomes easier to exchange and you feel less afraid to ask questions because there are no dumb questions when you don't know anything. Right. So I was very, very, very impressed, and I think there is so much potential in students, in Jewish students. They also have a responsibility to know about their history and, you know, where they come from so they can deal with these situations.
Right, exactly. So responsibilities in this case is quite an important issue. And I wanted to ask as well, so besides responsibility, when confronted with these types of situations, should we really engage every time? What types of discussions can be expected, and does this tie into a political landscape in some sorts? Now, with the overview of the general other question, I would like to give Yvonne the floor in terms of responding to this question.
Hello, thank you very much. I would like to say, from my perspective, it's a bit different because I come from Eastern or Central Europe, which would be the post-Soviet countries, where the experience is very different, where usually really people don't know anything about Judaism, and sometimes it even comes to the level of the education when it comes to the teachers. So I would have a personal story with my Jewish friend who went to primary school in the countryside in a smaller town, and she mentioned during the history lesson that she was Jewish, and the teacher would be very mad because she thought she's lying. The Jews don't exist anymore. So this is the level of the ignorance, and as it was mentioned here before, Hitler would commit the crimes and Stalin would hide the crimes. So there is a completely different field that we have to face. And when it comes to explaining the stereotypes, I usually have my best experience is that simply explain the stereotypes from the historical point of view. So for example, why are the Jews connected to finances or money? It is very simple. The Catholic Church would use the Jews in the Middle Ages to lend money with interest because the Christians couldn't do it among each other. It is that simple, but I think that many people don't realize it today. But when you say it out like this, it suddenly all makes better sense.
Right, yeah. No, I definitely agree at least with that statement. What I usually do when I'm confronted with that situation is something that I engage in called Jew-splaining, like explaining but from a Jewish perspective. So whenever really somebody comes up and tells me I'm the first Jew they ever met, it's really the opportunity to make them ask any question whatsoever, whether it be offensive or not, just in order for some of that ignorance to be able to go away, to avoid that ignorance to manifest itself into hatred and snowball further. Are you of the same opinion, and what is your experience with the image of Jews in general?
Oh no, I completely agree with you. Like, no dumb questions, you know, we're here to learn, and also even asking them questions so that they're not the only ones asking the questions and you're giving the answers, but an intercultural dialogue that needs to be happening, because I even sometimes don't know, things about, of course, some religions, and I want to learn more. And I think that there are no dumb questions for me, so there should be no dumb questions for you.
Yeah.
And I think it makes everyone more comfortable and happy and overall, more open-minded.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of bridges to be built and a lot of education for ourselves to even grasp. I think really with Judaism and the Jewish people and so forth, it's so hard for us, even ourselves, to be able to define it. So why should we expect other people to understand it? I think it's essential when you have that identity to be able to explain it to others. And that counts for any people group, to be really able to combat ignorance and hate through your own methods. Now, in terms of building bridges, there's something quite concerning that we should definitely talk about, and that is sometimes political anti-Semitism in the modern age and how that camouflages itself. So, regarding the aforementioned politics, they definitely do dictate our identity, unfortunately, and make us shelter ourselves. It is not hate of our religion that we experience, rather of a supposed collective identity taking a political shape which encompasses Israel as well. Loss of identity is preferred over explanations in our situation generally in Europe. During the 11-day Israel-Hamas conflict, 113 anti-Semitic attacks were recorded in France, and Jew hatred surged in other European states, such as the UK, Germany, Italy, and Sweden. Why has this surged, in your opinion, and how has the youth experience been for you during the war? Yvonne?
Thank you, Ethan. So I would like to say that at least in my country, during the May events, I didn't recognize any tension as much as I heard from you guys. And the events were just described as any other political situation or crisis. Of course, I had talked about it with my friends, but without any ideological assumptions. And unfortunately, people don't realize that no matter the religion, we're all humans and we can have different political opinions, and it shouldn't define the whole ethnical or religionist groups.
Right, there are often issues in regards to that where really the conflict is supposed to be a destruction of one people against the other. And it's not as simple as a football game, as is often said in our worlds. Carla, I wonder if you had any opinions on this specific discussion as well.
Yes, actually my experience was different from Yvonne's. I felt the tension, and it was a very strange situation because, well, it became a trend. Fighting for the Palestinians, it didn't even mean anything anymore. People were just saying it because it was a trend. Mm-hmm. And no matter what you think about the conflict, there were attacks against Jews, and it wasn't just online. It became something very real, and some people might say, but it's just a post, it's just a like. But that like gives legitimacy to that person that sends the hateful message, and it's very powerful. What I saw in Belgium was shocking to me. You would see signs written "Mort aux Juifs," which literally means death to Jews. I was in shock, and I think that there weren't sufficient measures put in place after that so clear message against Jews.
Yeah. We're often not even allowed to define our own hatred nowadays. Look at what happened in 2021. Whenever we would be able to argue against, hey, something is anti-Semitic, people often see something as being anti-Semitic as only being able to equate it to gassing Jews. Sometimes being able to steal parts of their identity, sometimes being able to do things that are so emotionally touching and that really attack the definition of what makes you you are definitely modern trends, unfortunately. And there's another issue, a very trendy word nowadays called intersectionality, which is basically a notion that all oppressed people need to be able to come together to fight against a common oppressor. So let's say, for example, there are specific groups that would basically contact African Americans in the US and say to them, well, hey, look, you're being oppressed by white Americans or by white cops. The equivalent for us is the Israelis. So why don't we come together and unite against our common enemy? Now, to the point, it has become very difficult to get out of the situation, and at least on university campuses. So myself, I was the president of the Jewish student community in Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And we definitely had issues with multiple organizations that just did not want for us to do anything concrete in terms of, representing ourselves or fighting back to a certain specific period. Now, lastly, I wanted to touch upon ignorance itself, because that is different than just the image of use. So, what are, in your mind, the best ways to educate? Or, ignorance confronts itself as Jewish students. We must address the gaps in knowledge. But we must address the gaps in knowledge, but first we must really situate it. Like, what are the gaps specifically? Too often are we seen as just victims during World War II, or supposed aggressors in the Middle East that kill babies and so forth. So how do we really address here? What are the priorities in that gap of knowledge in general society? Carla? Carla? If you want.
I think that Holocaust education should be mandatory to me. I was in a French lycée, and we had classes. It was part of history, because it is part of history, and no one should ever be able to say that it did not exist. History is actually written, you write history, and you can also erase history. So it's very important to just, since the beginning, tell everyone that it happened, show what happened, and make it, show that it was real. And it shouldn't be able to be erased like this. No way.
Right. Yvonne?
Thank you. What I believe is the biggest issue with this is that I'm trying to make, when I talk about Jewish history, I'm trying to make people understand why they should care, that the Jewish history is not something excluded, something separated. No, the Jewish history happened in each country and had an impact on the history of each country. And it is part of their heritage and their history, and that is why it is relevant. And as it was mentioned here before regarding Latvia, if people will not fully understand their part of the history, they can never really learn from it.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's definitely a lot more to touch upon, but I would recommend every single one of you to be able to talk with the younger generation of Jews that is really willing to define their identity in the modern age, what it means, and to be able to have those, discussions with different types of groups. I think that's the only way to move forward from this point. Now, unfortunately, we're going to have to cut it short here, and I would love to give the floor back to my colleague Tal Rabina to basically have the discussion on YouTube with Mr. Pancini. We might be able to hear back from this later on. Thank you.
Thank you. If we have those kids as our future, we are safe. Thank you so much. We are trying to go live to Brussels again, and I hope we do have Mr. Pancini from YouTube on the line. Yes, we do. Can you hear us, Mr. Pancini?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much for having me. Hi, Tal.
Thank you, and may I just introduce you to our audience, because I was not sure we have a better connection right now. So we are honored to host YouTube's Director of Public Policy in Europe. Mr. Pancini is a very good friend of us, I might say. And on a personal basis, I can tell you that as much as we learned, YouTube is indeed the most responsible social media platform regarding the subject we are talking this evening. Marco, what are you doing to try to prevent or at least minimize the way people are using, or better say, abusing your platform for hate speech and for anti-Semitism?
Tal, thank you so much. Let me start by saying that I'm humbled by your introduction, and really, if something that is on top of our mind and our responsibility is to make sure that we are seriously tackling the issues that you are discussing today. And also, I am personally very happy of be considered a friend of the European Jewish Association. I really respect the work that you are doing. What we are trying to do is to make a hard life and as difficult as possible to publish hate speech on our platform. Let me say loud and clear that we do not allow hate speech on YouTube. In order to do that, we build a approach which is using the best of the collaboration with institutions like yours, other important subjects around the world that are fighting against anti-Semitism, that are reporting content to us. Of course, every user of our community report anti-Semitism and hate speech to us. And what we also do, we use the best of our technology to make sure that we learn from all this input and we use proactive measures to find similar content against our policies.
Can you give us a practical example for what are you doing to minimize it?
So, of course, so the consideration, like our collaboration with an association, an institution like yours. So whenever you find something that is against our policies and of course is also hate speech and you report this to us, we remove it. We also learn from the piece of content that you send us. We identify elements inside of this piece of content. We build algorithms together with our engineers that can recognize the similar content that is posted on our platforms. We run this algorithm through our platform constantly. We check that these algorithms are doing a good job in identifying content that is against our policy. So, imagine that these algorithms run against the content on YouTube. They report this content to our expert. Our experts review the content, and then they take action. Whenever that's helping us to identify violative content. Almost 90% of the content that we identified, that similar violation, like the one that we are discussing today, are catch first by our machine, and then remove this content in a very, very fast way. Usually before used are even given to this kind of content.
Marco.
So that's like, yeah.
In the last few weeks, we saw articles both in the Washington Post and the New York Times claiming that not only you, but the social media, even when they are making any efforts to prevent incitement, it's usually on the English channels. And it seems you have a problem in the non-English channels. Is there any way that we hear from all over Europe, from all kinds of languages, how can we help us and decrease the number of incitements in the non-English speaking countries?
Of course, so the big number are for the English website. I don't have to disclose to you any secret. The critical mass of notices that we are receiving from English-speaking countries, but also in Spanish is really helping us to build effective tools. That said, I think a association like yours can really help us by reporting content in every possible language you find the violation. We have experts that are reviewing this content. The more content we are receiving in different languages, the better our tools, algorithms are in detecting similar content. So a pledge, like if I can ask something, keep on reporting content to us in different languages, and we are going to improve.
So this is to our audience. As I said before, we look at YouTube and Marco in person as our friend, and we have ways to report to them directly. Please use the opportunity, and whenever you see, you meet any incitement on your social media in your own language, please report EGA. And we, I might say, have a bypass straight to YouTube headquarters. We have also initiative called Go Flag Yourself, which I'll give Eitan to elaborate in a minute. Just to conclude our conversation, Mr. Marco Pancini, is there any proactive thing, not just preventing, not just fighting or combating the incitement, but is there any proactive ways we can do better to have a better use of this platform?
Of course, education is very, very important. Just to give you information, we announced at the Malmo International Forum and Holocaust Remembrance recently happened in Mo, that we are committing more than 5 million euros from Google.org in money and in-kind donation to fight anti-Semitism, to promote Holocaust education. So initiatives like yours can absolutely, for example, be eligible on this fund. It's a great initiative. I really would love to see more and more education and cultural initiative online to be supported by this fund. So do not hesitate to get in touch with me if you want more information on how to make sure that you can be by the association and other people in the room could benefit of these funds. So that's another way from my point of view, on top of removing, to help spreading positive message around this very important topic.
Thank you so much. Thank you for waiting for us because of the technical problem we had at the beginning. And we appreciate your time and, of course, most of all, your cooperation. And we see you as a friend, and we hope to elaborate our cooperation in the next few months. Thank you very much, Mr. Marco Pancini from YouTube Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Ethan, we talked about preventing incitement. We talked about reporting, and you are leading a project called Go Flag Yourself. Could you please elaborate?
Yes, we currently are developing a project called Go Flag Yourself, in which we motivate people, doesn't matter if it's around Europe or if they're Jewish or not, but what we motivate them to do is to come forward and report hate that they see online on multiple platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Google, YouTube, etc., and report those findings directly through the European Jewish Association, for the simple reason that it is more effective than the typical flagging operation, in the sense that the European Jewish Association has direct contacts with these companies and social media platforms. So therefore it is essential. However, I would like to touch upon the conversation that we previously had as well here, because I think that there's a lot more to say. What we discussed today only slightly touches upon a modern issue that cannot be solved solely by us, but also by you, our allies. Statistics reveal that Jew hatred is first and foremost a rising trend among younger generations as opposed to older ones. Those same stats show that Jews are the least likely minority to be believed or trusted when defined or when defining their own hatred. And these stats will also reveal that most also have no clue what Jewish people are. Are we a religion, a tribe, a people, a culture, or simply a collection of capitalists, a collection of communists? The reasoning for this belief is simple, ladies and gentlemen. A historic hate for a people based on ignorance and ideology, forged through conspiracy theories that until the last century was evident for a people without a land. Indeed, religion, culture, revolutionary ideals, and banks were the only transportable values and property for a discriminated people without a homeland, always guests at the mercy of their hosts. So, it is ignorance that these stats illustrates. Citizens of Europe are the most ignorant about Jews due to the lack of interaction and conversations. Unfortunately, and I have shared this experience as growing up Jewish myself in Europe, Jews have felt the necessity for the last decades to engage with a keep your head down policy. When the mayor of Berlin says that Jews feel safer in Berlin by taking off their kippah, that is something that will resonate with us. We will grow up with that notion when we're in school. We will grow up with that notion when we're in university and later on in life. To say it clearly to Europe, Schindler's List, Anne Frank, war and persecution are not our identity, and Jews in Europe wish to thrive and open ourselves up against once safety can be guaranteed. Time and time again, young Jews like ourselves need to fill the gap of common knowledge that no, we are not just pictures in your history book portrayed as victims of World War II, and no, we are not alleged aggressors and baby killers in the Middle East. We are frustrated, and we need to fill this gap urgently as to avoid free falls into Jew hatred. Only then will people acknowledge us as part of today, not yesterday. We are a tribe, an ethnicity, connected around the world because we left Judea with a suitcase named Judaism, which makes every Jew around the world be able to connect to each other. There is so much more to explain on this note, and I advise you all to engage with the younger generation of Jews as to comprehend what modern Jews are and how we can shape our own destiny through engagement and education. Speaking of education, it seems that most young Jew hatred comes from academic institutions. And let me make it clear right now, anti-Semitism, as I said, is more than wanting to gas Jews and recreating Hitler. And it is more than screaming Chai Bar and Itbach el Yahud. It is about failing to accept the people in its entirety and striping away their identity whilst holding a double standard against such. Whether we want it or not, our people and our identity will forever be seen by others as being tied to prior massacres and political association with the Israeli government. We have seen this manifest during the May conflict between Israel and Hamas, when students across Europe called for vague justice and peace by designing the destruction of a country whose notion is part of our identity and where many of our families live. I will not throw part of my people under the bus by pretending they don't exist as to be accepted in society. As a left-leaning Jew, I reject a left that wants the liberation of all peoples at the expense of others. And before you state the obvious, criticism of a government should be encouraged for a thriving democracy, but asking for the death of Zionists and delegitimization of our people is not criticism. Those are calls for violence. As we saw in May, calls to globalize the Intifada and crush Zionism worldwide ended in a 400% increase in anti-Semitic violence and harassment in the span of 11 days. 11 days. I hate to break it to you, but near all Jews in Europe and elsewhere are Zionists, according to the base definition. In fact, most of the world is. So many of the quote-unquote criticism are demands for a victor in a zero-sum game for a conflict, akin to a football game. Basing myself on Herbert Pargani's poem, What is Zionism? The right for Jewish people to self-determine their ancestral homeland? Yes, it does. The equivalent for French self-determination in France or the Swedish in Sweden. But it can also be reduced to a simple sentence. Next year in Jerusalem. No, it is not some hotel slogan, but written in our books and engraved in our hearts. Coming from documented history and the Bible, the best sold and worst read book in the world. This prayer became a liberation shout, a 2,000-year-old shout that the fathers of Kafka, Dreyfus, Proust, Freud, Wiesel, and Kissinger repeated every year at Passover. We are for inclusion and peace, but we will not secede our place. To make it clear, the actions of a specific government have never brought into the question the mere existence of our entire nation. So why Israel? And so why the Jews, including us abroad? Dear guests, it is time for a push in legislation to educate about modern Jews, provided by Jews of the next generation. And in an age where an incredibly high amount of Jewish students feel threatened to reveal their identity and speak against blind hatred, it is essential to safeguard Jewish students through an encompassing IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, because Jews don't fall in your general minority description of discrimination. If we want to make the next generation of Jews a reality, we must safeguard their presence in institutions and among the leaders of tomorrow at universities. I've heard of too many incidents of Jewish students dropping out due to lack of support, Jewish students being harassed through swastika carvings on their door and feeling pushed into hiding and assimilating over ignorant and hurtful comments and assumptions. So enough is enough. Help us make our existence a reality. Help us safeguard a next Jewish generation that will not have to knock on the doors of history to enter society. Descartes was wrong, stating, I think, therefore I am. It is false. We have been thinking for thousands of years, and we hardly do exist. I defend myself, and therefore I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Eitan. And Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, powerful words from Ethan Bergman. Thank you also to our previous panelists. We're actually running on time, which is quite incredible, and I'm happy to say we are. Before I bring up Mr. Panchevsky again for our last panel of the day, I wanted to outline something because it's tied in very, very closely to what the next panel is going to be talking about, which is the establishment of working groups in parliaments across Europe. And the European Jewish Association has pulled together what we call 10 Commandments. These are recommendations that parliaments should adopt across Europe. And I'm just going to run through them very, very briefly. Number one, we encourage and underline that every member state should safeguard the rights of Jewish people within the EU to practice religious customs. It's a fundamental right, after all, and that means kosher slaughter, and it also means brit milah, or circumcision. And from our point of view, it's just as important, every bit as important, as combating anti-Semitism, because without one, Jews don't exist. If anti-Semitism reaches its apex and gets what it wants to achieve, and equally, if legislation comes in making kosher slaughter illegal and brit milah illegal, there's effectively no Jewish communities left in Europe anyway, because we can't be Jews. We want to promote initiatives that underline that anti-Semitism has no place in a modern and tolerant Europe. You've heard that from a number of our speakers. That Holocaust memory is, of course, important, but we need a reassessment of how Jews are perceived in Europe. And I believe my colleague Ethan has stated that case extremely well. This should be part of national curriculums. It should be part of education from primary level all the way up to university. We want to ensure, and you heard from Carla and you heard from Yvonne, that universities are safe spaces for young Jewish students. That all aspects of religion, all aspects of being a Jew, including Zionism, can be discussed in a spirit of tolerance and mutual respect. We want to see more EU funding, more budget going to encourage member states to support the security of Jewish institutions. It's one of the #1 expenses for our communities, keeping them secure, keeping the gunmen out, keeping people out of synagogues is one of our largest expenses, which means that other issues suffer. Also, whenever something happens in Israel, anti-Semitic incidents spike across Europe. Anti-Zionism is often a cover and an excuse for outright hostility and hatred of Jews in Europe. So we encourage and we want to pressure the social media companies, and we heard just a minute ago from Mr. Pancini, we want to see more from Facebook, we want to see more from Twitter, and they should remove speedily clear anti-Semitic content. It shouldn't be allowed to fester, it should be allowed to feed algorithms. And we need a clear definition, and we need them to adopt the IHRA definition. We also need countries to ban and root out NGOs that operate from within member states to promote or support anti-Semitism according to the IHRA definition. And believe it or not, there are an awful lot. A lot of them are indeed funded. We want to see the ban and sale of Nazi memorabilia. Now, that's not to say that Nazi memorabilia, insignia, or whatever, doesn't belong in museums. That's not to say that it doesn't have a historical, intrinsic value to teach our children so people can see what it was all about. But it doesn't mean that Hermann Goering's cutlery set or Eva Braun's stole should be on the mass market to be bought by individuals who relish and promote and encourage and, in fact, lust after the kind of Nazism that we only got rid of. We want to also encourage those member states who haven't already done so to appoint a special envoy for combating anti-Semitism. And when it comes to BDS, I'm sure most of you are familiar with BDS, there should be safeguards, just as the US government and a number of states have legislation in place that forbids funding or support for organizations that actively promote and call for boycotts of the entirety of Israel, so too should the EU and member states put these safeguards in place. And lastly, these safeguards at both EU aid and neighborhood funding to bring in conditionality on commitments to fight racism, anti-Semitism, and discrimination. Any EU funds should be conditional on commitment to these principles. So with that said, and I thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving to our final panel of the day, and it falls upon me to invite up my dear friend, Mr. Bojan Pančevski again, from the Wall Street Journal. We're going to be talking about political actions going forward. We'd also like to invite Her Excellency Maria Encheva Pavlova, the Deputy Minister of Justice of Bulgaria, to join us on stage, along with a dear friend of the EGA's, Mr. Martin Engelberg, who's Deputy Chair of Foreign Policy at the Austrian Parliament. And we will also be joined via Zoom by the EGA's Parliamentary Working Group Against Anti-Semitism Initiative and a dear friend of the EGA, MP Konstantinos Karagounis from Greece. Bojan, I'm going to leave it up to you, sir. Sorry, Bojan, just so you know, this gentleman will be translating for the minister. Okay?
Hello, everyone. It's me again, the last time, I can promise you, for today. We have another illustrious panel. With us today are Her Excellency Ms. Maria Encheva Pavlova. She's the Deputy Minister of Justice in Bulgaria. We have Martin Engelberg, who is the Deputy Chair of the Foreign Policy Committee in the Austrian Parliament. And we've got Mr. Konstantinos Karagounis, who is the EGA Parliamentary Working Group Against Anti-Semitism Initiative in Greece. Thank you very much for being with us. The name of the panel is bombastic. It's called Battleground, Political Action Going Forward. It's certainly no overstatement that there is a political battleground in view of what we've heard today at the symposium. We've heard testimonies, we've heard reports about anti-Semitism thriving, contemporary anti-Semitism coming from the left, coming from the right, coming from the immigrant community. We've heard about a surge of anti-Semitism happening last year and during the pandemic. We've heard that Jewish people in Europe are equated with the State of Israel and its policies, even though in some cases they may never have been to Israel or are not even Zionists themselves. And we've heard from the younger participants, from the students, that there is a culture of young Jews or Jews in general keeping their head down. There is an element of that in Germany, where I'm based, where some of the Jewish organizations advise Jews not to wear their kippah in public, and in fact even the Commissioner for Anti-Semitism of the German government made the same advice in public recently and courted some controversy. So on that note, perhaps we should start with Mr. Karagounis. Could you tell us why are you spearheading this drive to set up working groups across Europe to combat anti-Semitism in parliaments? And perhaps you can tell us about the experience in Greece.
Thank you, Bojan. Greetings from Greece, greetings from the Greek Parliament. First of all, I would like to send my warm wishes to Rabbi Margolin and of course to all my good friends and associates of EGA, to all the distinguished participants, ministers, commissioners, parliamentarians. Indeed, Bojan, we are working in this direction, as you have already mentioned, to promote this 10 commandments that Alex have outlined in the national parliaments. And the important thing is to try to mobilize as many MPs as possible in the fight against anti-Semitism in a pan-European level. We have an excellent partnership with Alex, with Ruth, and of course my good friend Michel Bourari. We've spent a lot of hours of talking and planning towards this goal. And our goal is to coordinate the effort with MPs from all over Europe to take initiatives in as many parliaments as possible to create working groups that will promote the fight against anti-Semitism and the principles, of course, that you have outlined. And you give me the opportunity to address and share this initiative to the colleagues who are with us today to work in this direction. And just to answer your question, Bogan, you asked me why. Because we should always remember that the fight against anti-Semitism should be a two-way process. Sure, on the one hand, it should be a vivid, grassroots thing, and so it is, and it will remain so because this fight is a living moral and political thing. But on the other hand, it should also be an institutional and above all parliamentary process. Why? Because those two things are interrelated. People always are looking for leadership, and in Western democracies, parliaments are the place to reinforce and advance what is living in society. Otherwise, let me use this expression, we'll have the Corbyn phenomenon. In other words, while the fight for anti-Semitism is advancing in society at large, it is incapacitated by political figures who will nominally accepting that anti-Semitism is worth fighting against. In practice, they institutionalize anti-Semitism by creating a hostile parliamentary and political environment where the biased criticism of Israel functions as an effective way to do the old dirty job by new tricks. So, we should resist this by creating parliamentary cells everywhere, by creating a political process of vigilance, if you like, and so we will. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Perhaps I could give the floor to Minister Pavlova now. The Bulgarian presidency of the EU in 2018 took a lead in putting anti-Semitism and the combat against anti-Semitism on the EU agenda. So I was just wondering, the working group that is happening in Greece, your neighbor, perhaps would you take this idea on in Bulgaria? And is there any initiative to take a lead again after the pandemic?
Благодаря за поканата. Държа изказването ми да бъде на български, за което ще помоля моя приятел Яков да превежда. По време на изказването ще разберете защо държа да е на български език.
Well, I'm going to talk in Bulgarian because I'll feel much comfortable, and now I'll develop the topic with a friend. It's me, Yakov, and okay.
Не съм си подготвил предварително изказването и за това ще се стремя да съм кратка. Произхождам от семейство на български евреи. Моите баба и дядо и техните семейства бяха едни от семействата от 50 000 български евреи, които бяха спасени от депортация в концлагерите.
I'm a member of a Jewish family. My grandparents, my great-grandparents are all members of the Jewish community in Bulgaria. And I'm going to tell you a different story because the entire Jewish community of Bulgaria was spared from the horrors of the Holocaust.
Поради което съм и до някъде емоционална в изказването си. Баба ми и дядо ми, докато бяха живи, бяха благодарни на българския народ за това, за грижите, които е положил да бъдат спасени. Те, както и всички български евреи, положени от българската църква, духовенството ни, целия народ и интелигенцията.
My grandparents were very thankful to the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, to the common men and to the government for their different faith as opposed to all European countries.
За целта, докато бяха живи, обикаляха по училища, провеждаха срещи с общественици и разказваха какво са преживяли те в годините на Холокоста в България.
And while the Holocaust was going on in Europe, we were teaching our kids as to what has happened in Bulgaria during that same period of time.
Българският народ се слави като етнически толерантен и въпреки, че живееме на малка територия, в нашата държава етносите живеят в мир и разбирателство.
Even though we are a small country, we live among lots of ethnicities, and we live in a peaceful relationship. It's a harmonious country. It's a tolerant country.
Въпреки това, през последните години ние не сме подминати от вълната, надигащата се вълна в цяла Европа за антисемитизъм.
We are also facing a wave of anti-Semitism in our country, like in entire Europe.
И въпреки, че имаме уредено законодателство в областта за престъпления, извършени на расова основа, реално такива престъпления почти няма. В България почти не се разследват.
However, even though the constitution of Bulgaria and the laws of Bulgaria protect all actions against anti-Semitism and they're taking a firm stance, if we compare it with the rest of Europe, we are really in much better shape than all of you.
Към момента има създадени работни групи, които обсъждат промяна в наказателното ни законодателство, като има вероятност да залегнат промени в тези текстове, но все още в България няма легално определение за антисемитизъм.
We haven't developed direct laws now. I'm trying also to understand what she's trying to tell us. We don't have direct laws that interpret the terms of anti-Semitism actions. However, we are working, we have a task group at the parliament that is developing this task, and we are going to touch those issues as time allows them.
В България има една поговорка: народ, който не познава историята си, рискува да я преживее отново.
There is a saying in Bulgaria that a nation that doesn't know its history will repeat its mistakes once again.
Надявам се, че среща като тази и въобще изграждането на институционална памет ще спомогне за това разумът да надделее и да предотвратиме появата и разгръщането на антисемитизма в Европа.
And I hope with the examples that we show you in Bulgaria and the education that we provide people, we will help you in Europe to overcome your problems with anti-Semitism as well.
Thank you, Minister. Some words of warning there. Herr Engelberg, you're a Jewish member of parliament in Austria, which I've covered politics in Austria and Germany and Central Europe. It's a relatively rare occurrence, I guess. What would you do, if you could help instruct parliaments in Europe? What is the best course of action to educate people about Judaism, about Jews, about anti-Semitism from within the political system?
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much, and I'm so happy to be here. So, first of all, you're perfectly right. I'm definitely the first active member of the Jewish community in Austria to become a member of parliament since the war. And that already is an answer to what I think is important if we think about the Jewish communities in Europe. When I'm trying to recall the last 4 years where, ever since I joined politics in Austria, the most important thing is that my colleagues now became aware of how important the Jewish community is for a country. Politicians usually tend to calculate the votes and then counterbalance it with how important a particular community is. So Jewish votes in Europe are, in general, really not important by numbers. But fortunately, they started to understand how important it is to have a lively, a vivid Jewish community. And what can we do for that? And so I'll give you some examples. And the first thing is really show sympathy. For those who know me, actually the reason why I joined politics was upon invitation of Sebastian Kurz, who up until recently was our Chancellor, Prime Minister. He, from the moment he became member of the government, he hosted, for instance, a Rosh Hashanah reception And it was unbelievable. It was very unique for Austria. So it was a symbolic act, but on the other hand, you know, it is a clear signal that the Austrian government, the politicians are having a sympathy for the Jewish community. They want a vivid community, and that's like how it started. Now, I always tell those people, I mean, I'm from the Jewish community, and I know how, you know, sometimes troublesome Jews can be. You know, we are fighting each other, you know, we are trying to, you know, outmaneuver each other. You know, we are not easy. But if you want to have a Jewish community, you can't only honor the dead Jews, like Sigmund Freud or Arthur Schnitzler or whatever, and in their time when they were alive, they were not easy either. So it's not enough to honor them, what was, but we have to find a way to appreciate, you know, our Jewish spirit, our love for controversies, for discussions. It's not easy, and it's a challenge. And I think they started to understand, and that's really a beautiful, for me, it's a beautiful experience. So it went now much further. In the meantime, we have established a department in the Prime Minister's office, which is not only intended to combat anti-Semitism, but explicitly is for enhancing, supporting Jewish life. And I was really insisting on that because I think that's so important. I mean, a Jewish community has so many needs. As already mentioned, I mean, we have the challenge in Europe that Jewish communities are facing troubles with their religious needs, with kashrut, with kosher slaughtering, with Brit Milah. We are seeing several countries where there are restrictions imposed, and I think we have to be really very much aware of that threat which is coming, because it will really possibly really disable Jewish communities to function in Europe. So I think that's an important thing. Another thing is, as always, financial necessities. I mean, Jewish communities always have a need for money, particularly in Europe with very high security costs. In some countries, and up until a year or 2 years ago, also the Jewish community in Vienna had to bear the security costs, which were almost, I think, a third of the yearly budget, which had to be spent on security costs. I know that in several countries, Jewish communities still have to pay it. Now, in the meantime, we have a contract between the government and the Jewish community where basically not only the security costs, but even more like expenditures for education and so on are covered by the government. So I think that has to be acknowledged as well. And number three, I think, which should not be underestimated, is how important it is that a government in Europe changes its attitude regarding Israel. I mean, we see such an really outrageous behavior of the international community regarding Israel in international organizations. And unfortunately, European countries tend to be part of it. And I can tell you, it's not an easy work we did in Austria. It was not easy in the Austrian Foreign Ministry, you know, which has a traditionally pro-Arab or attitude, to change that. It was amazing. I mean, we had to kind of get after all the ambassadors all around in the international organizations, because they were voting against Israel on, and afterwards they were telling us, well, we thought it's fine because we always voted against Israel. Although there was an explicit demand, a requirement from the Chancellor that we change that voting attitude. So it took really 2 or 3 years, and in the meantime, we really changed it. And I had the honor to be in New York at the last General Assembly of the United Nations last September. And the Austrian ambassador in New York at the UN, he told me how wonderful it is now that so many countries call him and ask him why Austria changed its voting behavior in the organization and the reasoning for it. And they were then copying it. So we had, immediately there were other countries, because Austria, you know, is known as or has a tradition of being a little bit pro-Arab. And number two, it's a neutral country. So when Austria really changed the voting attitude, so then other countries also considered it. And you know, on top of it, I'm sure many of you know, I think we really made headlines internationally when the Chancellor ordered that the Israeli flag was put on top of the Prime Minister's office in the middle of the last Gaza rocket attacks as a sign of solidarity for Israel. I mean, it was wow. So I think my encouragement will be, and that's where I want to end.
Was that a controversial move in Austria?
Sorry?
Was that a controversial move?
It was, yes. It was criticized by opposition parties, particularly, you know, from Social Democrats. There was, you know, it was questioned also within our party, which is a centrist, like in Germany, the CDU party. But we did it, and it stood. And I think, as a last line, the bottom line is, and that's my encouragement also in Austria to our younger generation, get involved in your local politics. You know, in Europe, I feel that Jewish communities still tend to stand on the sideline. You know, because of the Shoah, we have problems to fully identify and, you know, fully stand for living in those countries which were so severely hit by the Holocaust. But I think it is really absolutely necessary that we get involved into politics. I encourage young people very much, and I say, no matter which party, just, you know, get involved, get engaged. I think politicians need this contact, and that's I think what I would want to end with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is the final illustrious panel today. I thank the participants very much. I think it was very informative, very interesting. Please, a round of applause. And I invite them to leave the stage, and I think Alex will give us the closing word.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to announce that I had a great tutor in the form of the European Director of European March of a Living Network, a certain Mr. Michel Gourari, who taught me timekeeping, and I'm delighted to report that concludes this part of a symposium. At 7:30, there'll be a reception just outside these rooms, and then we'll be having our gala dinner in here. So I'd encourage everyone, I know it's been a long day and a lot of you have traveled far and wide, stretch your legs, get some fresh air, have a refresh, and we really, really thank you for your time and your attention, and I very much look forward to seeing everyone back here for our gala dinner at 8 p.m. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.